evening and welcome to the Roban Report. I'm Bubba Roba, and this is my spectacular friend Thaddeus Gubbles. And tonight we have for you...
Yeah, whatever, Bubba. We're here to talk to you about a groundbreaking epidemic that's sweeping across our country, drug abuse. The percentage of drug users here in Vietnam has increased exponentially in the past 10 years, almost threefold. But why? I don't know.
It's because illicit drugs have left the rural mountain areas and entered the city. Opium, heroin, marijuana, this stuff's all over the place now. And younger people are beginning to engage in the consumption of drugs, along with an increased number of females.
I knew that.
I'm sure you did.
Well, I did know that the British were the first to bring drugs here to Vietnam.
Really? Explain, Gubbles.
Yeah, back at the beginning of the 19th century, we began an opium trade with them. They brought in opium to our country. And then the government banned that, though. But the Chinese still continued to smuggle the drugs into our country. The drugs really became a problem during the war again, though, because the soldiers like to use the drugs as a method of self-medication or stress relief because they're more readily available and a lot cheaper than alcohol.
The government was actually okay with this.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of negatives that came with it. The drugs severely jeopardized the performance of the soldiers and led to the accidental destruction of many aircraft and personnel. After seeing this, the government decided to completely outlaw drugs from military and civilian use. Drug abuse actually calmed down for a while, and a portion of the addicted users were able to surpass their addiction. By the time the war ended, less than 10% of the population used drugs.
Aha, just goes to show that rehabilitation is possible, even in the harder times of our country. In the 1990s, when the drugs really became a problem again, our government started to build rehabilitation centers across the country. Although there are very few of them, more than 250 people were cured of their addictions each year.
Where were these addictions cured?
At the centers.
Alright, thank you very much. Perhaps the government should build more of these centers to fight the increasing number of drug abusers.
It's a good idea, Bubba.
Ah, shucks.
People need help. Addiction to drugs has ruined the lives of many people in our nation.
Speaking of which, we have here with us Hito and his wife Flo to tell you about how drug abuse has impacted their lives. It's a very interesting and heartbreaking story, but if you stay tuned, we'll be back in just a few short moments just to tell you the stories of their lives.
Hi, Billy Bates here to talk to you about coal. Do you realize how much you use coal in your everyday life? Use it to power your trains, to power your steamboat, to cook your rice, to power your electric bread slicer. We here at Coal International like to send you the best quality coal. Our workers work their butts off to get you good coal. You should buy our coal because it's good and it burns good, like coal should burn.
Hello, I am Bubba Robo for those who are just tuning in, and this is the Roban Report. I'm here to tell you the stories of Hito and Flo Smith and how they became addicted to drugs in Vietnam. It's truly a heartbreaking story. So Hito, I'd like to start with you. How are you today?
I am good, thank you.
That's very good to hear. I'd like to ask you, how did you become addicted to drugs?
Well, it all started after the war. I originally used the drugs as painkillers, but when I got home, I just couldn't stop. All of the veterans have had the same problem.
Let's see. It's terrible to hear. And how about you, Flo? How did you become addicted?
Well, there's so much stress living at home without Hito, and he told me that they served as a really good stress relief, so I started to use them, and I just can't stop now.
I see. Well, Hito, have you ever thought about trying to quit using drugs or just put an end to it?
Yes, I did. But drugs such as opium and heroin are just so addictive, I can't stop.
Okay, and Flo, have you ever considered going to a rehabilitation center?
Yes, I have. I think it would be very helpful, but there's just none of them around here. I know the government's trying to build a lot of them, but there's just none of them here.
How is the drug problems between you two and your family affecting everyone?
Oh, they are horrible. We barely had any money to begin with, and now that we're addicted to these drugs, we are just completely broke. We can only have meat once a month, and our children are always complaining about how they're so starving.
I see, that is awful to hear, but the latest statistics show that the most commonly transferred drugs are heroin and ATS. Traffickers are taking advantage of the lack of legislation and judicial laws against trafficking, but the government has taken steps to put an end to the drug trafficking. In the period of 2003 to 2004, the quantities of illicit drugs seized has increased by the following: heroin, a staggering 50%, and not far behind, synthetic drugs at 46%, and cannabis at 36%, which is great to hear because that is massive numbers. More than 18,200 people and some 12,000 drug cases were arrested in 2004. The recent dismantling of large trafficking rings have created a gap in the supply, though, and the government is worried that drug trafficking along the border is going to increase, so they are taking steps to put an end to it. So, thank you for tuning in with us and listening to Hito and Flo Smith's story. We really appreciate it. Thank you. This is the Robot Report.
Hello and welcome back to the Robot Report. For those of you just joining us, Bubba and I just brought you an incredibly powerful story about the problem of drug abuse in our country. And Bubba had a tear-jerking interview with a family affected by their addiction. But we're here now to bring you something completely different, but that can be traced back to drug abuse, and that is AIDS.
As many of you know, Vietnam has a huge heroin addiction. Heroin is injected through a needle into one's arm, and many people tend to share the needles because it is cheaper. The sharing of needles can spread AIDS from an infected person into someone that is not infected.
Sharing needles accounts for more than 30% of the AIDS infections here in Vietnam, but it's not the only cause for AIDS. The disease can also be transmitted sexually. Prostitution is a major issue here in Vietnam, and AIDS goes hand in hand with it. Many young women in need of money are more than willing to subject themselves to such activities without the use of proper precautions.
Yeah, this has been showing very true in a case that's been gaining increasing attention in the past few years. It seems that truck drivers are a major cause of the spread. This is because truck drivers, away from their friends and families for long periods of time, are likely to have multiple sex partners at different truck stops along the highway. Poor women and young girls living near truck stops resort to commercial sex for income and therefore are vulnerable to HIV infection, accounting for 1.6% of AIDS infections.
The bottom line is that more than 290,000 people are infected with AIDS here in Vietnam, and an additional 100 people are infected every single day.
It's very unfortunate to hear, Gubbles, but it seems to me like this is a helpless situation.
It is unfortunate, Bubba, but don't lose hope. There's help for these people. The United States has become a major benefactor in the fight against AIDS. In a program started by George W. Bush, the U.S. has spent more than $300 million in fighting AIDS in Vietnam. The 55 clinics across the country have come as a result of this funding, and the U.S. is providing medicine, 2/3 of those being treated in Vietnam. Their funding accounts for 80% of that being used to fight AIDS here.
Well, thank God for their help, but many doctors throughout the nation just don't know where to get the medicine the patients need. And the fact of the matter is that there just simply isn't enough public education about the disease being provided here in Vietnam.
Such a shame. So many individuals suffering out there. Well, at least there's hope, and there's some peace in that. I'm Thaddeus.
And I'm Bubba.
Hey, Eve Sterling here. Here in Vietnam, we have the finest rice in the whole world. Here we have our rice farmers picking rice in the rice paddies. They do this every day for you, because rice should taste like rice.
Hi, I'm Thaddeus Gubbles, and take it from me, a celebrity, drugs are really bad. They can ruin your life in so many ways. You can lose your job, you can lose your home, you can lose everything that ever mattered to you. Drugs can also be hazardous to your health. AIDS can occur from using heroin that's injected directly into your blood. Heroin is injected through a needle, and if 2 users share a needle, then one person can get infected from somebody else who has AIDS. AIDS is a death sentence. Addiction can be cured, but AIDS can't. So be careful next time you reach for that syringe. This has been your friend Thaddeus Gibbons from the Gibbons.
Now time for a letter to the editor. Dear editor, You keep mentioning these rehabilitation centers, but you never mention what the centers do to actually rehabilitate the abusers. Could you please elaborate? Sincerely, Anonymous. Well, in the rehabilitation centers, the abusers are put away in a safe environment away from any temptations. They are also given counseling. The centers are much safer than jail and only about a fourth of the cost. They also use the Living Values activities for drug rehabilitation in 65% of the centers. The LVADR teaches recovering abusers how to cope in the real world without drugs. They have found it to be 90% effective. Thank you, and be sure to write in again.